So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us in what promises to be a really interesting and I'm hoping illuminating discussion on coping in challenging times. We're really privileged to have with us four very erudite and experienced speakers and doers, people who don't just speak but actually go out there and work with people, and the wealth of experience that they come with is something that I'm hoping we will all benefit from through the course of this discussion. We have with us Mr. Rajiv Mehrotra, of course, who's the Managing Trustee for the foundation. And our four speakers today are Dr. Oberoi Vahali, who is a professor of psychology at Ambedkar University, Delhi. Then we have Dr. Bhargavi Davar, who has been a tireless sort of advocate for on mental health, and she's been speaking on behalf of people with a diagnosis of mental illness for years now. She runs the Bapu Trust, and she's also the convener for TCI Asia. We will go into their profiles in detail in a bit. Then we have with us Dr. Amit Sen, who's the director for Children First. He's a psychiatrist and he's been working with children and adolescents for a very long time. And last but not at all least is Dr. Anita Ghai, who's the Dean of the School of Human Studies at the Ambedkar University Delhi. She teaches psychology, and she's also done a great deal of work on disability. So we're hoping that once we get into the conversation, we will go back with really interesting ways of viewing the human condition, especially at times like these, where you really wonder what your life is all about. When you're coping with something as unnatural as the situation that we've all found ourselves in because of the pandemic. But before we get into that, I'd like to invite Mr. Rajiv Mehrotra to speak and to sort of introduce this entire session and to welcome everybody to the session. Mr. Mehrotra.
Well, on behalf of the Foundation for Universal Responsibility of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, a very warm welcome to our panelists and all of you here. The aspiration of this session really is an extension of the aspiration of the Foundation and His Holiness to explore ways in which we can, for want of a better word, all be happy and to create a conversation between traditional wisdom, traditional practices of healing and nurturing the mind, and the more contemporary modern perspectives. So we're looking at a series of events, discussions, seminars, publications over the coming year that will look at these from diverse perspectives in a spirit of mutuality and understanding. We're not looking for the sort of very syncretic approach that, that what the conventional wisdom is perfect and modern psychology sort of validates it or otherwise. This is a genuine space for conversation and dialogue. And that really sums up what we're seeking to achieve. And so I really want to express my deep gratitude for all of you for being here. And I had just thought that in keeping with this mission of ours, that I think one of the first sort of important questions that comes up, certainly in the realm of the sacred traditions and approaches, is that when is there a problem? And when is a problem a problem? And very often, just the other day, I was reading a manual on psychiatry, modern psychiatry in the United States, in which said if you were grieving for 15 days, you should go and see a psychiatrist and receive medication. Now, that's not how I think traditional wisdom looks at it. So I think it's important, perhaps our starting point, and then, of course, the floor is yours, and I'm here merely as a facilitator in a very minimalist fashion, that perhaps we could just understand from where you are and your areas of specialization in a few sentences at when is it? When is the mind a problem? And are we sometimes in too much of a hurry to look at a solution when it is just a natural part of our evolution and growth. So thank you very much, all of you once again, and thank you, Aparna, for holding our hand and taking the lead in putting this whole project together. So it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mehrotra. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to put together this wonderful panel of guests for today's program. I will begin with introducing Dr. Hani Oberoi Vahali, who is a professor of psychology at Ambedkar University Delhi. She trained as a psychologist, clinical psychologist from NIMHANS, and went on to receive her accreditation as a psychoanalyst from the Indian Psychoanalytical Society, Kolkata. She has also been instrumental in setting up the Center for Psychoanalytic Studies at the University of Delhi, along with her senior colleague, Professor Ashok Nagpal. Dr. Vahali's PhD thesis for her book Lives in Exile, Exploring the Inner World of Tibetan Refugees, explored the intimate manner in which culture and psyche are interwoven with each other, and how Buddhism functioned as a creative force in helping the Tibetans work through the trauma of displacement and refugeehood. Dr. Vahali looks at psychotherapy as a humane and deeply attuned spiritual process of reaching and caring for the suffering of the other. As an educator, she advocates a reflexive and empathetically attuned form of teaching, which attends to the life history and emotional struggles of students. Dr. Vahali, may I please request you to, begin with a few words about your own work, where you come from, and to then connect it with our sort of common lived experience of the pandemic, and your insights, and what your key takeaways would be for anybody listening to this conversation. You're on mute, Dr. Vahali.
Thank you, Aparna. I hope I'm audible. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. So let me begin by thanking the Foundation of Universal Responsibility and all of you as its organizers. My special thanks to you, Aparna, Pranamali, and of course to Mr. Rajiv Mehrotra for thinking of me and making it possible that I'm here today to participate in this significant discussion. It is also a beautiful coincidence for me that all of my co-panelists are long-term friends, with each of whom at some point or the other, I have had the opportunity to collaborate and work together. So as far as saying something about myself, let me say this, that for the last 25 years or so, I have been working both as a teacher as well as a psychotherapist, and working with people in states of emotional breakdown, in states of distress. And also much of my work as an educator has been about creating possibilities for younger generations to know what is this art and what is this practice in which we devote ourselves to the life of the other, but by first of all working on our own life. And here I would like to say that my first training was as a clinical psychologist, in which the model of training was primarily that of psychiatry. And as you yourself said, I trained at NIMHANS, which is a neuroscience institute. What I missed there was really a self-reflexive, inward direction into the healer, supposedly the one who claims to have some knowledge of working with other human beings. Yeah. So everything was, while that was a great training and I learned much from it, but there was never this demand from our trainers that we needed to look at our own lives, that we needed to look at our own self. That there was not that the dividing
I think we have a technical issue. Let's give it a minute and otherwise carry on with somebody else, and hopefully she'll rejoin us. Give it a minute. Sometimes these things sort out.
Table between the clinician.
You're on mute.
Mute. Yeah. Sorry, I think I lost you all. Yeah. So I was just saying this, that as a clinical psychologist, what was significant for me was two things which I thought were problematic in that particular training. Was that one, the life history of a person was by and large understood from a medical perspective, where an individual is the carrier of the problem that one is going through. And history, politics, social context seem to be like, just one-liners in that life, in the exploration of that life. And secondly, that it did not seem that the training provided oneself with a way of thinking that you are actually quite the same as the people that you are working with. That there is not a fundamental difference between the one who's working as an expert and the one, and there is no expert. So we are all like people who are vulnerable to life at any given point of time. And I was in search of a perspective which spoke about this. And therefore, two perspectives came to me. One was the existential and the other was the psychoanalytic. And why I then went on to train as a psychoanalyst was that the first principle of psychoanalysis is that you are your first patient yourself. You undergo a long process of self-treatment before you aspire to work with anybody else. Yeah. So you get in touch with your own illnesses, you get in touch with your own existential crisis, you get in touch with whatever is problematic and conflicted in your life before you think that you can work with somebody else. Yeah. So the other thing that I got to understand was that the psyche is not something which is just about a person. Even if a person is living the crisis at a point of time, there is a history to it. There is a behind it. What Mr. Mehrotra was also saying, that and also the manner in which there are informed ways in which uh, the, the spaces in which we grow up, they tell us what is suffering and what is not suffering. Yeah. And a lot of time there are existential crises which we are led into choicelessly. Yeah, we had not chosen that in our life, but the larger forces of human existence take us to there. So what is that form of psychology that is born from there? This was my quest. The other part of my long-term quest has been that I feel that, care in the psychological domain has become very much a product of capitalism of the times in which we are existing, and only very few people are able to access care even when they need it desperately. So I was instrumental and fortunate in setting up two centers of psychotherapy. The first one, as you mentioned, the Center of Psychoanalytic Studies at the University of Delhi, which was an explorative and experimental space. And the second, the Center of Psychotherapy and Clinical Research at Ambedkar University Delhi. In both of these centers, we aspired to create a deep going philosophy of psychic transformation, also taking care of the ethical imperatives of it, by which I mean to say that we tried to offer therapy at low cost or no cost to whosoever was in need. Of course, this is a huge challenge because the amount of people who are in need of care always numbers the effort that we can make. So we are like a small drop somewhere. And from there, how does human subjectivity transform itself when you are offered care, when you need it? And this is not always based on a monetary transaction between the patient and the therapist. Yeah. So the patient gifts us with their life. Yeah. I think there is no greater gift than the privilege of being taken into the life of the other person and to be trusted with that. And we ourselves are transformed in the process of, transforming the subjectivity of the other. So it's a mutual, it's something which is mutual, and it's a partnership that we imagine. So for today, let me say this, that, every crisis, when I think about it, is actually a turning point. It is like a linking. If I think of a metaphor, I would say it is like a linking point in a road where multiple junctures meet. And from where, in following any one of them, we are likely to be led to a journey which has a life of its own. So Mr. Mehrotra said in his opening remarks, when do we think of something becoming a problem? I think a challenge acquires the form of a crisis when it tests us beyond our capabilities and abilities, our familiar and imagined ways of existing, and when it hits us with an intensity that we are unable to withstand. Sigmund Freud, long time back, said that the nature of trauma is such that it tears the protective shield of the psyche, and no prior preparation suffices us to meet it. So, however, whenever there is a challenge which acquires the form of a trauma, it also unconsciously reactivates all past crises, and so ancient issues appear before us disguised in ever new forms. In the face of such challenging moments, we may temporarily break down. Nevertheless, as a turning point, the crisis also carries the seeds of the breakdown becoming a creative breakthrough. And I think that, every therapist knows this, that the person who comes seeking help, or even our own self in a time of crisis, feels like we are breaking down, but the capacity to look at that pain is also capacity to make it more bearable for ourselves, and therefore the it becoming like a point of creative coming together, yeah, coming in a more integrated form together. When I was thinking about this discussion, I wondered which route to choose in my brief remarks, whether I should speak from my experience in psychotherapy and focus on the insights we reached with my fellow co-travelers, my patients, or whether I should think of this topic from a larger point of view, that is to dwell briefly on certain strands in our collective psyche as we cope, survive, or creatively resurface through challenging times. Also, because I realized that my co-panelists were all practicing clinicians, I thought of taking up the former one, that is talking about certain psychodynamics in our collective life in the face of trauma. So, everybody knows this, and I don't need to say anything about it. That's 2020 has been a very, very unusual year in which the unimaginable has become the new norm of our existence. And the disease, the coronavirus disease, has not only remained a biological entity, but like all biological diseases, it became a moment in social history. And what we also saw was that in the wake of this new pandemic, there was a lot of justification of fascist and authoritarian control. This too is not really unique as we look into our past, because we can see that whenever humankind has been confronted with outbreaks of challenges, also diseases and epidemics, especially the contagious ones, the response of the state and society, with some exceptions, has been of blaming, shaming, shunning, humiliating, and practicing untouchability vis-a-vis the patient. All of us are mental health practitioners here, and we would bear witness to the fact that mental illness, even though it has never had a history of contagion, it has been treated like one, which is as if the patient could create a contagion on others, as if the patient's suffering could touch us and we try to draw distance from it. So when I think about why we do this, I would think that at the heart of forms of the deepest forms of challenges is the basic dread for human beings, and that is the dread of death and annihilation. In everyday manifestations, this comes across as a feeling of being erased, of being ignored, or simply of being wiped out. In some ways or the other, our identities being denied. And as collective history, just as in collective history, so too in the context of our clinics, our psychotherapy clinics, we realize that our patients talk about anguish-laden narrations in which, in the intimacy of the clinic, we hear the story as if I do not exist or somebody will take over whatever I have made of my life. So here I would like to say this, that we protect ourselves through unconscious psychological processes, which are called as defense mechanisms. Sometimes we repress a part of this dread of annihilation. At other points of times, we project it outwardly. We make somebody else the enemy. Uh, we create all forms of othering. Sometimes we create the other as the other, and then we also keep a link with that, what we call as projective identification. We sometimes we split the world between good and bad, and so on and so forth. We use a lot of defense mechanisms to meet the challenge of annihilation. And during the time of the COVID, also we can see that Muslims became the people who are spreading the virus. Northeasterns were treated badly. In US, the blacks prejudice came up in a much greater manner vis-a-vis the blacks. So instead of the pandemic becoming a leveler, the pandemic became a multiplier of discrimination in some sense or the other. The other thing I would like to say here is that in the face of this challenge, we also saw that that there is a propensity in human beings to take on to authoritarianism, to submit themselves to authoritarian forms. And that too we saw, whether we go back to the times of the Second World War and the Nuremberg trials, where people said that we were not doing anything bad. Actually, we were just agreeing to certain commands that were given to us. The point I'm making here is that it seems that as human beings, we have this propensity that we give into moralism, even when it comes to us in authoritarian kinds. And that gives rise to fascist and totalitarian forms. However, there is something different we could do in the way that we cope with traumas, but that requires us to meet the trauma differently too. So instead, if we don't go into the history of othering, we have many other ways in which we could meet a crisis, or we could meet a challenge. And I think this rests on the recognition of the enormity of a situation and its multi-layered actuality. So it demands of us, just as what we do in our clinical work, as a collective also, we are called upon to acknowledge the sources of insecurity and fears without allowing them to take over us, take over our rational judgment. Whenever we allow ourselves to feel the impact of our actions on other human beings, we don't give into unjust power and authoritarianism. So to be in the awareness of the other's pain and to allow oneself to be touched by the same, can do something to us. And that is what we do as therapists as well. So the spread of coronavirus and the thousands of deaths taking place every day are a real tragedy, gripping the entirety of humankind all at once. Painful as this is, the moment promises an authentic encounter with what it means to be a mortal human being. It is thus crucial for us to resist giving into fundamental forces and to direct ourselves to the voice of our conscience, retaining a connection which makes us available to our own pain as well as to the pain of others. So one lesson that we learned from the practice of psychotherapy and learned it very well the last year was that mourning of grief is important. Mr. Mehrotra also said that, sometimes Western psychology says this, that 1 year when somebody dies, 1 year after that you can mourn, and after that it is a pathology. I would say it is not a pathology. Mourning is also about remembering what we have lost. So it is also a resistance to forgetting. Yeah? That is one point I would like to say this. And therefore, the pandemic promises us with recognizing our humaneness very differently. 2 points, my last 2 points, and then I will end because I think I've already taken a lot of time. I would like to say that as a clinician, I realized that a lot of people, including my own self, but the people I was meeting in therapy were saying one thing, that the year was a very lonely year as contact was, reduced outwardly. But they also said another thing repeatedly. While they were feeling like they were close to a breakdown, they were saying, we have seen ourselves as we have never seen ourselves before. This time of loneliness had become like a reflecting mirror on their own life. Yeah? So they could see the life differently. While this was bringing up panic, this is also the point from where in the therapy space, we could begin a different form of a dialogue. Yeah? They did not need the defenses that they were used to earlier on because those defenses were in any which way not protecting them any longer. So, we have a psychoanalyst by the name of Wilfred Bion who said that the art of therapeutic work is to make the unbearable bearable, the intolerable tolerable. So I think the pandemic gifts us with that possibility too in recognizing ourselves. And as this talk has been from the foundation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I couldn't end by saying something about the Dalai Lama's way of meeting challenges. As a student of his works, I have realized that he has utilized the crisis of being exiled in a very creative manner. And by making suffering as a stepping stone, by recognizing it, by bearing witness to the enormity of the suffering of his people, he has led to the renewal of a different form of Tibetanhood, a new form of Tibetan identity for his people. And I was always very much struck as a researcher, for several years now, I would say more than 2 decades, that how, along with the Dalai Lama, the survivors of torture who had gone through unimaginable hardships in their life could use that suffering into a creative force of inward-looking reflection and compassion for the other. So, when I would talk to a lot of my Tibetan respondents who were also in part like friends and also sometimes like my mentors and teachers, they would say that the deepest fear was that in the moment of torture, they could come to really hating the torturer. Yeah? So that was the fear. The fear was not really a fear of something else, that your own identity was challenged and you could become like somebody like the hated other. The last thing I would like to say was that I found very beautiful with the Dalai Lama when he says that forgiveness is never based on forgetting. Yeah? It is always based on remembering. It is only when you remember the challenge that you can actually reach forgiveness. Otherwise, you will reach some form of collective denial. Yeah, so I will end here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vahali, for that really thought-provoking, uh, remarks that you just made. Break down as breakthrough, and the use of suffering in a creative way to actually become almost an impetus to find a better self and to find that strength that resides within us. And I think your point about forgiveness not being an act of forgetting, but rather an act of remembering, and therefore allowing that to help you to sort of move forward. Thank you so much for your remarks. I will now go on to Dr. Bhargavi Davar. Dr. Davar is a mental health activist and founder of the Bapu Trust for research on mind and discourse at Pune. She's also the director of Transforming Communities for Inclusion, or TCI Asia, as it is better known. She has been working for years through these organizations to advocate for the full realization of all human rights for persons with psychosocial disabilities, especially the right to live within the community. And I must say that, the work that she has done has truly been path-breaking, not just for people in India, but across the world. I mean, she's recognized as one of the foremost leaders of a new way of looking at mental illness, at mental health, at wellness, emotional distress across the world. So, I'm just so, I'm delighted that she is here today to share her work and her thoughts on coping in challenging times. Dr. Davar's academic work has been on gender, culture, and disability studies, and the basis for the modern mental health policy frames in Asia. She's been very active in the framing of laws within our country and in other places when it comes to the rights of those with a diagnosis of mental illness and disability. And I think she has been one of those people who has really worked for people with mental illness to, sort of be looked at within the wider ambit of disability. She completed her PhD on the mental and behavioral sciences, on the ethical and epistemological foundations of the mental and behavioral sciences, and the possibilities of human freedom within those disabilities. And she's, of course, written numerous books, the latest amongst which is Gendering Mental Health, Knowledge, Identities, and Institutions. She is somebody who has constantly journeyed that gray area between madness and creativity in her work, insanity and spirituality. And her organization, Bapu, has aspired to be a haven for those who've been excluded and those who live in the margins of society. Arts-based therapy and the community approach are significant tools that the Bapu Trust uses for the support of people who are going through emotional distress or who've been diagnosed as having psychosocial disability. Dr. Davar, I would request you to share your thoughts at this point. You're on mute, Dr. Davar.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much. Aparna, that was, I'm quite humbled by the introduction. Thank you so much for all those kind and encouraging words. When I began my journey, I say that I started my work at the age of 5 or 6 when I was exposed to mental asylums that my mother was interned in. So I go a long way. I say that I had a head start on mental health work because of that exposure. And also I knew what was not good for me for a lifetime, and those institutions are not good for me. They don't offer care. They offer penal treatment like they do in beggars' homes or in leprosy homes, in various shelters. India is post-colonial. I jokingly say that we got the railways from the British. We got the English language from the British, but we also got the mental asylums, beggars' homes, and leprosy colonies from the old laws that they left behind. And we have not changed them. And that's our bad that we didn't change them. So for a long time, I continue to have traumas from those days of wandering in these asylums. For some reason, the doctors, with all their good intention, thought that I should be with my mama, who was in and out of these places, heavily exposing me to trauma. And so I call myself a childhood survivor of mental asylum trauma. Many people have tried to convince me that these are modern places and I should, not call them mental asylums, but I resist that. They are mental asylums because those laws continue to exist. We continue to multiply institutions in our country and other Commonwealth nations. Sincerely we believe that the mental health legislation is about care, whereas it's actually about withdrawal of justice. It's actually about deprivation of liberty. And that cannot change because these laws are like 200 years old. There was one big part of the story which led to the Bapu Trust. Bapu is my mother's name. And then someone challenged me, one of the donors who came into our office said that, you're contesting the state all the time, but why don't you actually do some work instead of just critiquing the state? We know you have a chip on your shoulder. You've carried it with you, long enough. You have a cross on your back. We realize all that. You're a very angry person. Yes, good for you, but put it to some constructive use. So we started community programs. We realized that, the state and the community, they have a very complex relationship. It's not always healthy, that relationship. When the Mental Health Act, for example, the state has not done anything, nor can they do anything except create some large population-based policies that can address, like really big populations. That's the kind of population we are dealing with in India. A large set of that population is also poor. So cannot really blame the state for setting up these structures. And because in fact, communities have broken down. So we started to look at communities, and that was really the inspiration given to us by ActionAid at that time. They really woke us up from being so self-obsessed about my own, history and my own memories and my own this and my own that, and said that just go out there and see what people need, ask them. Don't just sit here in your chair and talk about the state is not doing this, the state is not doing that, and all of that. So, and we did that. It's been 20 years of the Bapu Trust, just looking at what people need. The same time, of course, I struggled a lot with my own personal traumas of these places. So then I started to go and do many projects, research projects, which helped me to exchange with communities of different kinds. India is beautiful in terms of its diversity. So we just worked in Maharashtra, but we went and visited, various communities which were actually into indigenous healing, like, for example, the dargahs, the mandirs, the Pentecostal churches. They were not formal religion, they were like Sufi on the border of Islam, Pentecostal on the border of Christianity, cults, Hindu cults, which were on the border of formal Hindu religion. All these have wonderful healing cultures and traditions. So we studied them for about 3-4 years. Found that art and artistic expression was a very prominent feature of these places. We've written a lot on these topics about indigenous healing. At that time, the state came in with the anti-superstition bill, so we opposed that. I remember holding an exhibition at the time with people doing these piercings and people in possession and trancing, people drumming these huge, amazingly huge drums, folk. And then people singing folk songs about Datta, and all of that. So, and we were almost pelted with, and especially this was a lot of so-called modern human rights people who came in again with good intention. They really angrily challenged us. What are you trying to do here? This is not the way we have to talk about rationalism. This is all superstition. And we were taken aback and saying, it's so beautiful. Look at the colors and and it's all helping people help themselves. If you look at the mental health spectrum, it's a wide range of issues. That's true for all so-called diseases. You have a range of things that you can do for helping yourself. Self-care is very important for us to keep well. And for us at the time, it was like for well-being, when people have to really ventilate and just share their emotions, and they have this supporting community to do it, and then you go in trance. I mean, what is the problem that we work in the bastis for the last 18 years, and we see that a lot of people, including mostly a lot of women, they allow the Devi to come into them, and then they act as a support system for other women around them. And some anthropologists have called this, a way of obtaining justice for the women who otherwise would have to face a lot of, maybe violence in the community, some level of lots and lots of gender equality and inequality issues are there, of course, as we all know. So it helps them to right that situation by taking some community action. So we started to slowly look at, okay, let's not look at the state. Now let's look at what's happening in communities, because community is where the action is. Community is the resource. It's not the state. State is offering very little, but state cannot offer happiness to communities. It cannot offer the extent of support that only communities can offer each other. And so this became like more and more. And so we started looking at designs of community work, which started from the community. It didn't start from an expert view. I myself at that time was introduced to Buddhism by Lokamitra and his monastery center here. That was about, 20 years ago, when I moved to Pune and started doing a lot of meditation practices. Really helped me to address the trauma, because as modern theory says, trauma is in the body. And I was having all these, sensory perceptions from very long back. The images of my mom and things done to her within the mental hospital system. And so it helped me to really calm down a little bit and address my own well-being without having to get angry and explode all the time and be enraged and, start the blame game. It allowed me to just sit down for some time and do nothing for a bit, and the world is looking better slightly. It helped me to do that. And I did that for many years. I continue on that path. That's how we got this. I want to show something which brings me to arts-based therapy. It's just a small. Yeah, I brought these pictures, I get them from my brother this is from the temple of Mahakala in Ujjain. And sorry. These are, I've called it transformations. These are phenomenal images with a diversity of, persona, each persona evoking different kinds of thoughts and feelings in us as we look at them. Yeah, and this is the basic structure. I mean, many of us would know this as the Shivling. And it's just one structure which kind of, it gives so much potential to who we are as beings. Every day we change. Some days we are men, some days we are women, some days we regress into childhood, some days we are very old, wise people, and this changes moment to moment. And the Buddhist view that everything is impermanent, and so is yourself. So don't hold on to it too much. Really, we wanted to bring this learning into our community work. And we know completely that, the causes and conditions that results in mental health issues, they look something like this. They look something like this. So a lot of external factors and a lot of internal factors as well. And it's like, this is our external world and we're just mirroring, oh my God, poverty, oh my God, housing problems, oh my God, lack of access to support systems, oh my God, poor healthcare, so on and so forth. And there's so much of that. And then we really think that this is never going to change. Many of us, including me for many years, lived my life saying that the government this, the government that, these people this, my husband that, child this, and it didn't help. Not that those are not true, but to really change that perception into what is true, what is reality, and what role do I have? We just lose our sense of agency, when we think like this and start the blame game. And it helped me a lot to just, to see, okay, what is another way of looking at it, and what should a mental health system which is addressing communities be able to offer? And this is what we came up with, that there are, like the Mahakala temple and the different persona, each with its own need. You need different ways of addressing community needs in psychosocial health and well-being. We also, of course, change the definition. We never say mental illness, we never say patient. Driven by the disability perspective, which also came to us along with Buddhism and its wisdom. There was the Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It allowed us to decolonize our view about mental illness, and start to look at a diversity of needs, starting from stresses of daily living, daily stresses and disturbances, adding up to someone requiring somewhat support needs from a person, not qualifying who that person is. Our system is completely bottom up. Address specific support needs. Like, for example, when somebody, especially during Corona times, we saw a lot of people, of course, Hani talked about it, and we all know how much of grief, loss, mourning, fear and terror, traumas were generated by the whole experience. Add to that police atrocities, the bandobast, the lockdowns, the unpredictability, the unemployment, all of that in our working communities. We work in low-income communities. We work in the slums of Pune. Our coverage is pretty large. It's about 15 lakh people. We cover about 25% of Pune slums. We work closely with the government, both with the local government as well as the state government. And so addressing specific support needs on a continuing basis. So there is, if you read this slide from 1 to 6, then you will find that, as the needs increase, then the need for support also increases. So there is a low support need. So 2 people with 3 things, 5 high support needs, like 5 people with 20 things, full range of community-based support needs, like the entire team with like 100 things. So we have well-developed, matrix for our interventions. A lot of it is arts-based therapy techniques, which are highly simplified. We also do, cognitive behavioral, really something which helps communities to engage with their own emotional. So we do, like, for example, we do sessions on selfing, we do sessions on, this is the 8-point framework. This is what we apply to create that matrix in the box of choices that people must have to address a diversity of needs. We work with people by the hundreds every year, if not the thousands, but definitely hundreds. And top priority is self-care, doing things to care for oneself. People used to say that all the poor people, all that they need is only food, clothing, and shelter. You know, your project is going to fail because who needs mental health care anyway? But this was not, was not our reality. I won't say that there is a big line waiting outside because there is still stigma attached to going to a mental health center. So people don't directly come into our offices even today. We reach them. We have one Anganwadi school, one small office there. We have, the community center. We have an office there. We hire some small places where we can work with communities. When people have a higher need, they do come to the hospital because we offer comprehensive health care also. So if a lot of people suffer from nutritional needs and so on. So this is what we call the 8-point framework. A large part of that is self-care, nutrition, and building social capital, addressing social justice issues, bringing communities together on the idea of wellness, offering support groups, connecting people with support groups, healthcare. We have a homeopath working in each of our centers. People go to wellness programs, organized fitness programs organized by the Bapu Trust, so on and so forth. So we have a whole basket of choices, and the promise of this kind of model is that it is modular. So you can take like 2 things from self-care, 1 thing from social justice, 4 things from comprehensive healthcare, and go on and develop that into an intervention package. And these are all very simple things that goes to people on a daily basis. So it works for this particular community. This is one of the big topics for the community program, circle of care. So when we talked about reclaiming communities, how do you do that? It's possible, I believe so, with low-income communities. It's more difficult in middle-class housing societies where the trust factor is so limited. Whereas in open communities, the trust factor is pretty high and people are in general altruistic. So you see on the slide, the number of people who come in to support each other. And we depend on this resource. So we consider ourselves as facilitators, not experts. We draw our staff from the communities where we are working. We train them a lot over a year, 2 years, along on the job, but also there are levels of trainings. So so this is the kind of understanding that we have developed on community mental health and what are the possibilities. I'd like to thank Aparna for having me here, and it's wonderful to be a part of the foundation's work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Davar, for that very interesting talk. And I think what it compels us to do is to actually look at our situation vis-a-vis the larger reality that we inhabit. And I think especially that last slide that you shared of, a circle of care, I think that should be something that perhaps more people have access to, because like you said during the course of your talk, it's about bringing agency back to oneself, and these give you sort of very definite things that you can do to improve the way you're feeling, and it puts you in a place of control in a way, so that, okay, maybe I need to now reach out to that bhajan group that I haven't reached out to in many years, or maybe I need to call my school friends, and that is my second level of care, so it gives you a sort of definite thing of, okay, what do I do next, instead of just feeling, oh, I'm overwhelmed, what do I do, I'm scared, or and especially in challenging times, such as the one that we've gone through and are still actually inhabiting. I mean, look at the COVID cases going up, who knows what is going to follow. So thank you so much for that conversation, and for helping us realize that there could be other ways, and that it is a multi-pronged approach, really. that we're looking at. And, many times things that we perhaps dismiss, as being irrational could perhaps also have a role to play, because a lot of the times the things we feel are irrational as well. So a lot of our emotional distress sometimes is irrational. So perhaps, irrationality is a way to deal with the irrational. I'm now going to go to Dr. Amit Sen, who completed his MD in psychiatry from NIMHANS and trained in child and adolescent psychiatry in the UK. He also briefly worked with the NHS in the UK. After returning to India, his main work has been in the areas of service development, community outreach, awareness building, and advocacy. In the clinical domain, his focus has been on trauma, adolescent depression, and ADHD. Dr. Sen is the co-founder and director of Children First, which is a multidisciplinary institute that provides clinical and community-based services in child and adolescent mental health. He is the founder of the ever-evolving mental health program at the Salam Balak Trust. And he's, of course, also worked with different organizations, consulting with them, including the UN Human Rights Commission and UNICEF. And he, of course, has also spoken at various conferences, written, written books and chapters and papers in peer-reviewed journals. Dr. Sen, you have a wealth of experience when it comes to working with children and adolescents. And I think this has been a rather unusual year for them. Perhaps adults have a way of expressing themselves. I'm not sure children always necessarily have the language or the vocabulary to explain what they're going through. I would invite you to share your thoughts and what you think the experience has been vis-a-vis children and adolescents when it came to coping with challenging times, such as what we've just gone through and are going through.
Thank you, Aparna. Thank you so much for the elaborate introduction. And thank you very much, the Foundation of Universal Responsibility and Rajiv, to invite me in this wonderful forum. Very reflective indeed. And I think, although, like you were saying, Aparna, that, we have had so many webinars and digital meetings in the last 1 year, but I think there are some which are more relevant than others, some which provide a space where ideas that come up could become instruments of genuine change. And I believe that hearing, firstly, the way you formatted it and listening to Hani and Bhargavi, I sincerely feel that I'm privileged to be a part of such a gathering. My journey in the beginning was somewhat similar to Hani's, because I also trained in NIMHANS, which is, of course, the front runner in mental health and neurosciences, a huge state-run hospital, somewhat similar to AIIMS in Delhi. And the quality of training, if you look at global standard, is supposed to be very high. However, it is very biological, and it is also hierarchical. And even if you come from other disciplines like psychology or social work, your training essentially is psychiatric, and that's something which I gained from, no doubt, in a big way when I trained there. But in my journey afterwards, as I started, I realized my comfort and the magic that I felt while working with children, which made me choose child mental health as a further specialization or a discipline. That that journey compelled me to unlearn a lot of things I learned in the beginning. So when we moved to, my wife Shailaja, who's also from the mental health domain, she's a psychologist and a writer and a family therapist, and both of us decided to go to UK to train in child mental health. Where working with the NHS, we realized, although that also works at a through mental illness lens, where you evaluate people who reach out to you for help, you give them a label of a mental illness, and then there is a a whole range of things, both clinic-based and community-based, which help the person to, to feel better, to get better, and to get rehabilitated. But what actually I learned from that experience was the kind of respect and dignity and the acceptance of people who may have had struggles with mental health, right? And the acceptance of that fact in the larger community, even, the ease with which they talk about it, like, I mean, I often say that if a family takes their child to to a pediatrician here, they would probably openly talk about that to their extended family or friends. But if they had to go to a psychiatrist, they would want to vanish if ever that bit of knowledge came out into the larger community. And that was a refreshing change out there, the acceptance firstly of if you want to call it mental illnesses or mental health struggles, and also the respect and dignity with which they treated children, adults, the families who went through periods of struggle in this domain. So after having come back from there, and of course, Shailaja and I had this single-minded purpose of working there, gaining some experience, coming back and doing something here, because child mental health again is a pariah. I mean, mental health is marginalized in the country, but within mental health, child mental health is further marginalized. So, in fact, when I came to do a survey of child mental health services in 2001, while we were working in the UK, I was struck by the lack of services and the lack of awareness of what it means to have difficulties. Particularly for children, and in fact, many people would ask that, really, I mean, children become depressed. Interestingly, childhood depression was something that was not a thing till the 1970s. And people believed that children could not get depressed. I mean, they could get badly behaved, but they did not have the emotional maturity to indeed experience something like depression. And it was only from the 70s onwards, 1970s onwards, that people began to understand that no, children can actually have very complex emotional states and go through huge amounts of turmoil and difficulties, even in very, very early years. So coming back here, when we started child mental health services initially through a multidisciplinary, multi-speciality hospital in Delhi, we wanted to take from our experiences, from our working in England, from our training at NIMHANS, and we soon realized that that's not going to work, and because by its very nature, child mental health, uh, is it's planted in the community. Again, some of the slides that Bhargavi showed about the kind of things that can influence, a person's mental health, and that is so much truer for children, because right from development to developing perceptions and worldviews, to upbringing and parenting, to the schooling and education they get, to what they encounter in case they happen to get into any kind of mental health difficulties, whether it is a so-called illness or, let's say, substance abuse, or become badly behaved for that matter. Is uh, is really can be really jarring. And again, the state can be extremely uncompromising and insensitive to the needs of children, and that's been our experience from the time that so we realize that unless we go out into the community and begin to build those systems, this is not going to work, right? So children first, right from the, well, I would say right from the outset, because we've had some experience working with uh, children and families, as I said, building a multidisciplinary team in a hospital. And then we moved out completely. We realized that this cannot be run through a hospital. It has to be in the community, because that's where we belong. I mean, we are a part of that community indeed, right? Rather than being sitting there as an expert and dishing out diagnosis and medication or specialized therapies. And soon we realized that we had to engage in the process of the upbringing of children growing up in a community where they have to start with, feel emotionally safe. And our endeavor was to actually go out there to make spaces which were emotionally safe for children, whether it be in schools or the transport systems or the playground, colleges, NGOs, or government organizations, and so on, right? So indeed, although if you look at uh, Children First's uh, name, it says it's a a mental health institute, a multidisciplinary mental health institute. But we don't believe that we are an institute which sits at a place and, again, sort of engages with uh, people or children who develop problems on their journey. We don't behave or don't engage with them just as experts, but we engage with them collaboratively as partners. And we indeed feel privileged when we get to know these sometimes absolutely wonderful families who are going through a difficult phase, but bring so much richness in the community that we have tried to build. So, in fact, uh, Rajiv's initial question as to when is it a problem, the way we look at it again is not from an expert point of view. It's not when an expert tells you it's a problem that it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem when you as an individual or a family think that you're going through a difficult time and you need to reach out for help. It's a problem then. So the problem is initially defined by uh, children and families who are experts in their own lives, much better experts than we are, we believe, right? And once they bring that problem to us, then we try and sit down and reflect on it and try and, be like a mirror and throw some light on it so that we can figure out solutions together. Yeah. And again, not from an expert point of view, but from a collaborative community point of view, right? In fact, from a therapeutic approach, we follow what is called a narrative therapy approach. And over there's one saying that the problem is the problem. The person is not the problem. And the problem is often social. And that's key in the way we function from Children First. So, when we first came, we were often told that, don't put your eggs in one basket because, a standalone child mental health facility is not really going to be sustainable. And but we stuck with you know, uh, our dream and goals quite doggedly, and we started what we did. And some of the things that came up after that, bore out, and in fact, it strengthened our belief in the steps we had taken. For instance, we came back from England in 2003, started our work in 2004. And by 2005, the WHO had done a multi-centered study across the world to assess the extent of child mental health problems. And they came up with figures of 20%, and this is called point prevalence. At any given point of time, they said 20% of children and adolescents would have a diagnosable mental health condition, right? And that was supposed to, in their prediction, would go up by another 50% by 2020, right? And which means that it would become 30%. And we are not surprised with that, with the kind of, response we got from the community when we reached out. Indeed, there are more statistics, if we again go by the mental illness model, that 1 in 4 young person would have suffered from an episode of clinical depression by the time they're 18, right? And suicide, of course, is a huge, huge problem. India is often said to be the suicide capital of the world, and it is indeed the #1 cause of death in young people in India. And that's a very sad reality. It's not like that in other countries. Suicide is usually at #2 or #3 behind road traffic accidents and acute illnesses and stuff. But in India, it's the #1 cause of death. So that's alarming, absolutely, right? So we had all this to deal with in any case. I mean, as adults, I think our lens is often, um, it's colored by, a combination of worry and concern and judgment even, right? So oftentimes we are talking about how badly behaved our children are these days, how rude and arrogant they can be, or how many risks they take, or how they engage with the social media and the screen, and what's going to happen to this generation. My God, how irresponsible they are, and they're not willing to, take charge of their lives, and of course the substance misuse and all of that, that really alarms the adult world, so to say, right? So I think children and adolescents already had a lot on their plate even before the pandemic hit us. The pandemic is, as Hani also has described, so in a multi-layered way, is a source of complex trauma. Indeed, it can be likened to perhaps a massive tsunami or an earthquake, but at a global level. And the fact is that it still hasn't ended. It's been more than a year, and we are still in the throes of it, and we don't even know with any certainty as to when it's going to end. And that uncertainty makes it even more difficult to cope with. And of course, the world of a young person has gone into complete turmoil. You know, in the beginning, when schools shut down and parents were not able to go to work, there was this initial celebration and euphoria about, oh my god, so much of family time, we don't have to go to school and there's no homework, it's such an extended holiday. But after 2 to 4 weeks, it just came right round to bite us. That space and the lack of structure and the routine, which we don't ever think about. We take it for granted, but it's such an essential thing, particularly for children, to give them a sense of being held. It gives them a certain scaffolding, and when you take it away, that uncertainty then gives rise to um, you know a confusion. It gives rise to frustration and a helplessness. What do we do at that time? When do we sleep? What do we, and so from then onwards, when sleep cycles and eating patterns started getting disrupted, the behavioral patterns, and the behavioral problems, so to say, also got began to get escalated. And subsequent to that, of course, I mean, there was this whole institutional breakdown. Everything from schools, colleges to offices, they shut down. Transport systems shut down, and that impact again, on young people's minds was profound. So and of course the lack of any kind of pleasurable activity, the lack of choice of going and pursuing your favorite hobby, going and playing football, hanging out in the park or the mall, or all of that went out of the window, and that gave rise to such a degree of hopelessness and a sense of loss and sadness. And of course, it's still unfolding, and I believe that mental health struggles, if you like, after something like this, which we could never have been prepared for. It's something that is unprecedented. We still cannot gauge or fathom the impact of it, and it's probably going to unfold over the next few years to come, right? In the here and now, what we have found is that some of the people that we used to see earlier and who had so-called become much better and left our services, gone away, many of them returned, saying that, you know what, we are having another crisis. Can you please begin to see us? There were also many people who were so-called, neurotypical or normal, who were doing great in their, in education, in their careers, etc., would have lost their job, a young person, or could not go to college after doing brilliantly in the board exams. And for them, life came to a standstill. And many of those kids and young people and families started reaching out as well. So I often say that this pandemic has been a great leveler. It kind of has affected every strata of society, including, if you would like to call it, the dysfunctional, disabled, mentally ill versus the neurotypical, functional, not so mentally ill. They also started getting affected, and the understanding that mental illness or mental health struggles can affect anybody across the spectrum, I think, became a reality. That's a huge understanding and a huge revelation, a realization. I think as a service and as professionals, we always knew that. But for the rest of the world to see it, again, we have talked about stigma, about marginalization. And I do believe that people with, mental illness are labeled, it's almost as if they have a defect and they need to be marginalized and kept away. It's almost like, I think Honey said, that it's contagious, that you're going to give it to somebody else. So you better be somewhere else. So schools, colleges, communities will actually either hide them or discard them, isn't it? Right? Now, with this current crisis and the effect of the pandemic and the trauma in people's lives in general has brought up another dimension to what mental health or mental health struggles can be. And that I think is an understanding and a realization we need to hold on to. And perhaps, hopefully, will begin to shape some of the ways that we deal with the infrastructure that we make, or the way we deal with our children, the way we collaborate with them, So, I mean, we've had to think on our feet. A lot of our services, particularly with the young people, had to shut down because of the shutdown of physical spaces. But we've also had to innovate in the digital space. We've had to go online and develop many other kinds of other ways of reaching out to the community. Some of them have worked out very well indeed. And if time permits later, if there are questions about it, I can share some of those things. But I do believe that this is a game changer. And while we are struggling with it still, this gives us a huge opportunity to question the given, to question basic things like, what is success? what is development, we talk about the Sabka Vikas. What is this Vikas after all? And we saw it, I mean, I think Arundhati Roy said recently that, a pandemic like this actually exposes all the fault lines in a society. And indeed it has, in such stark ways, and here is an opportunity to question some of those things, questions even our institutions of education, of, um, organizations that build careers. What is this all about? How have we affected the environment? It was so refreshing. One of the most refreshing things that I experienced was that 3 to 4 months into the lockdown, everything had become greener. The birds had come out, and we live in a place where there's a lot of greenery around in south of Delhi, and we had animals coming out in a forest called Sanjay Van. The nilgais, the jackals, they started coming out so much more, and you saw that this, and of course the pollution levels went down dramatically. It went into healthy levels. The sky was blue again, and then again sort of began to question all the different sloganeering and the politics of let's say pollution in Delhi, that has plagued us over decades now, right? And how simple it could be, the answers that is, right? And those are again things that I think we as a community need to think about, and especially with children and adolescents who will be the vehicles of change in times to come. If we give them that respect, if we give them the space to reflect and take this forward, the understanding and learning from this time, I think the world might begin to change in a different way, and we might be able to develop more spaces, healing spaces, respectful spaces to talk about mental health, to talk about human struggles, and in a more normal, in a more normative and accepting way. So I think I'll end here, and I'll wait for any reflections or questions later.
Thank you, Dr. Sen, for that short talk. And I found it really interesting because in a way it spoke so well to what our earlier speaker spoke of. So when Dr. Oberoi Vahali spoke of breakdown as breakthrough, and your reflection on how the pandemic actually gives us a great opportunity to relook some of the things that we've taken for granted, to really question what is so normal about what we take for granted as being normal, and so on and so forth. And what Dr. Davar spoke of in terms of the importance of the community, and your talk also sort of reflected similarly on children especially, and how their worlds are mediated by these larger circumstances that they are part of. I'm now going to go on to Dr. Anita Ghai, who is the Dean of the School of Human Studies at the Ambedkar University Delhi. She's also a disability and gender rights advocate. Her contribution to the field of disability studies, of course, is considered seminal. You will find her quoted whenever there is anything to do with disability anywhere in academics. She explores disability in India as a social, cultural, and political phenomenon, arguing that this difference should be accepted as a part of social diversity. She has also often spoken of her own experiences as a person living with disability, and the lasting impact of external messaging that conflates disability with defectiveness. She's somebody who was given a diagnosis of polio at the age of 2, and that was an experience that informed her exploration of the intersections of beauty, femininity, and disability. She teaches psychology. I mean, that's how I first met her. She was earlier with the Jesus Mary College, teaching psychology over there. And I think what is really interesting about her work is how she has constantly spoken of, how disability manifests in the dynamic space between social interactions and relations with other human beings. So it is when you're interacting with others that your disability comes across, and not necessarily in the living of your own life. And she's also, of course, spoken eloquently about the pandemic and what that has done to the inner lives of people with disability. So Dr. Ghai, if you could pick up the threads from here and speak about your work, and especially vis-a-vis the pandemic, and what your learnings have been and what we can take away. You're on mute, Dr. Ghai. You're still on mute.
Yeah, okay. It was saying that the host would like to unmute. Okay. So thank you, and thank you to Ms. Malhotra and of course Aparna, who I met many, many years back in Jesus and Mary College, and of course had a kind of, I think, sort of a love at first sight kind of a relationship. Uh, when Bhargavi said that as a 2-year-old, she remembered her mother, who was in the asylum. I want to kind of say that as a 2-year-old, I was, I'm not sure whether I've taken the victimhood in that sense, but of course I had, polio. And I think for a family which had come back after the partition and a kind of lower middle class, it was a real shock for them. I mean, when I had polio, I think my life began as someone who was, bechari, like, बड़ी सुंदर लगती है पर देखो ना बेचारी, like the kind of understanding which is always there, that okay. Or when somebody would say कि अरे लंगड़ी कहाँ जा रही है, when the words would come to you, and I would go back to my father and say कि I mean, why did they say that? And he would, simply say कि उनको ऐसे ही सिखाया हुआ है इस करके, और तेरे को नहीं कह रहे हैं. I mean, like, and somewhere would want to kind of, say. So I think after I heard, Honey, after I heard Bhargavi and Dr. Sen, I mean, I was just trying to ask myself, what have I done? I mean, like, in that sense, what has been my contribution in one particular sense? I can't say like Bhargavi that I started thinking about mental health at the age of 2. No, I didn't. I was so busy trying to be cured in one particular sense, in the sense that anybody and everybody in my family and an extended family would either take me to the shamans or the mystics or somewhere. I mean, if the Sai Baba had come, then maybe I would get the grace of the Sai Baba and, I would become okay, So cure was the kind of, illusion. And of course, a lot of medicalization, which was there, I mean, in the sense. So as I grew older, I think for many years, it was like as if, my education was not so important as my cure was, I mean, like, that I had to walk like a normal person. And I'm not sure whether at that time I remembered, or I would now say the able-bodied society. That will come later. I mean, like, it is there in my vocabulary, but not at that time, So I was like, obviously trying to do what, I think everybody would say was, pass as the normal, you know, we will also go to the new normal also, but pass as the normal, and pretend that, nobody has seen you, I mean, like, so you would wear, like, pants with bigger bottoms so that, the calipers are not seen by anybody. And yet, when I would kind of, come back, and little glimpse from the mirror would say कि तुम कुछ भी कर लो, the gate is not going to change. Walk तो वैसे ही करेंगे ना जैसे करेंगे. So I think it was like, it took me time, and the overcoming part was very, very important in my life at that time. And as I realized, I mean, that that my father specifically understood that, education is going to be more important, and as a somebody in a middle class family where marriage is not going to be the possibility that is going to be there. So at least she has to be educated well enough in one sense. And I think as I started, and then I went to IP college, which I think was a really a change, because IP college was a college where, uh, talking about, the discourse on, the fact that gender is important and how women are understood as in a patriarchal setup, And I think that was a very, very, I think I was very fortunate that I actually got admitted into that college. And I think with more, then I did my MA. And at that time, I kind of, went to this clerk who was, in those days, no, people who passed out in 1980s, their MAs, they were all very, very fond of taking the IAS exam. Somewhere we all wanted to be the bureaucrats. I'm so glad I didn't go into it. But anyways, so I went in, and there that clerk said that why have you come? So I said I wanted the form. So he said, form आपके लिए, आप तो handicapped है. When he said कि handicapped है, तो said कि नहीं 6x6 corrected glasses है और आप तो चल नहीं सकते, तो आपको तो कोई नहीं. I think that was the time. It was not so much the hurt that the form has not been given, when my mind is, as per the Delhi University, in my own pride, I was the topper and whatever. And yet I was not being given the form. And that I think was the time when it hit me. And it hit me, and I understood that whether I like it or not like it, whether I don't call myself disabled or not, or handicapped or not handicapped, the fact is that it will always be, the others, and also the gaze with which it comes, the stare that it comes with. There I'm going to remain like, what I am, and that I think also created a change in my own understanding of how was I to, follow this terrain that I had, I was very, very clear that I didn't want to go into, with the due respect to the NGOs, with the due respect to whatever, or like what Honey did, about creating the centers. In that sense, I was sure that I don't want to do any of these things. I really wanted to do something else. And that something else was where I did not have a conversation. It was important to have a conversation of converted talking to the converted. But I think more important was for me where converted talk to the ones who have never thought about disability, and I think that became my, one particular, you could say goal, where I think when Dr. Sen talked about awareness, community, and I thought that was something which I kind of, really, took up my goal as that how would I create this awareness. And more so because I, with a very clear feminist leaning, and the fact that within women's movement, there was nothing being talked about disability, and at that time, that shook me also again. And I think my first work that I did was in creating that book called Disembodied Form and Issues of Disabled Women, which was with, on the basis of interviews, that I had with the, people like Kamla Bhasin, people like, Jaya and all. And Kamla saying something कि औरत होना अपने आप में सबसे बड़ी disability है. And I had to kind of, then be the devil's advocate. And I said, ki Kamla, where is the other part? You've understood womenhood by understanding disability, but have you understood disability? And look at it. And it was amazing because Kamla had a son also who had a disability. So it was very, very amazing for me that how come that within the women's movement, where she was a mother herself, and she'd never, and when I was interviewing her, there was a time where she started crying and she said, ये कैसे कर दिया मैंने, कैसे गलती हो गई मुझसे. तो मैंने कहा गलती तो नहीं होती है, हिस्ट्री होती है, और हिस्ट्री में कोई चीज किसी टाइम पे आती है और कोई चीज किसी टाइम पे आती है. So I think it was with that thought that I started, but then I realized another thing. Because I was an academician, I knew that I mean, in a college like Jesus and Mary College, you can't leave 18 classes and, do whatever. But I knew that one thing is there, and that is that I have to, that writing was very important, somewhere that writing, and also that writing to be shared at different levels, where I could say what it means to, whether it was my own, this thing, but that was not so important. It was also how to connect, because you see, unlike issues like caste, you're in the same neighborhood where, the caste is the same in that sense. But disability is not like that. You might be disabled in this particular residential, association, and you might find another one maybe 3 blocks from here in Rajouri itself, but about, 2 or 3 kilometers from there. Or you could meet them somewhere in the hospital, in that particular sense. So to find out that how our collective voices could be kind of, generated, how would we kind of, say that this is where, Bhargavi has already spoken about the convention and all, so I don't want to, take too much time on that. But that was the time when we got the 1995 bill, and then of course 2016 bill. And what was amazing was, and more so when I saw the 2016 bill, because I was like at home, and how they were on the parliament, what they did. And I realized that there was a 10 minutes discussion. In those 10 minutes discussion, they just asked, how many reservations? 3 से 5 करी तुमने? नहीं, कम करो. And no other conversation, nothing, and also with the authorities or with the prime minister kind of trying to say that, you're very inspirational, Divyang are very, very inspirational, which meant that you don't need anything, So there is, तुम कर ही लोगे, मतलब तुम्हारे पास इतनी strength है, and they don't think that how this collective disabled talk about the whole understanding of karma, how the retribution for the past sin comes. I think of this 6-year-old beggar. I was in Jaipur, and I'd taken the students to actually see the mental hospital, and we thought we'd go for lunch. And the 6-year-old beggar came to me and said, "Luli madam, tu to kuch de de." And I was taken aback. I said, "Acha, मैं दूंगी, पर तुम मुझे बता पहले, थोड़ी देर मेरे पास बैठ, तो मैं तुझे खाना भी खिलाऊं." तो नहीं, मेरे को खाना नहीं चाहिए, पैसे दे मुझे. तो मैंने कहा, हाँ ठीक है, पैसे भी ले ले, खाना भी, पर खाना भी खा ले, मैं भी खाऊंगी, तू भी खा. तो मैंने कहा, तो तुझे कैसे, मैं तो लूली हूं नहीं. तो कहने लगी, क्यों, तू तो लूली तो है. तो मैंने कहा, नहीं, मैं लंगड़ी हूँ, मैं लूली नहीं, So for a 6-year-old to kind of, get this kind of a, language pattern. So I said, कैसे कैसे पता चला तेरे को? तो she said कि नहीं चाल में ऐसे बोलते हैं, movies में सब बोलते हैं, television में सब बोलते हैं, when she said कि तू तो, so then and madam was very important, so I was the power, the issue of power that I could do that, and I could have given the money, so when she said that, तू तो I said कि क्या मतलब हुआ तू तो? नहीं तुझे पाप भी तो है ना तेरे पास, तूने पाप किया है ना, तो तभी तो तेरे को सजा मिली है ना. तो मैंने कहा मुझे तो नहीं सजा मिली. तो लेकिन उसने उसको लगा कि and yet look at the construction, कि कैसे how it is, tied up with whatever is there in understanding of disability as karma. And I had taken that stool from the next shopkeeper, and I just, so that she could sit. So we had this conversation. I will cut the story short, and I just told this guy to say thank you for the stool, and he said कि नहीं हमारा भी आज का पुण्य हो गया. So I had only taken a stool from there for that little girl, and that became the पुण्य. उसका पुण्य हो गया और मेरा नहीं रहा. मतलब like that. Now I think these are just a couple of examples that I kind of cited out here, but I feel that how disability is understood in a given society. I think disability has been either, of course, they will fight out with the language. Somebody will want to say that they are differently challenged. Somebody will want to say they are differently abled. And I keep saying that everybody is differently challenged. So is Aparna challenged in a particular way. So am I. I mean, and so on. So the first thing would be that they would start fighting on the language of it, what exactly it is meant by that. And the other part is that where, you kind of, try to say that how disability is understood by the able-bodied society. And I feel, people keep saying, Dr. Sen said that mental health can happen, will be affected with everyone. But I always maintain that the heterogeneity of disability and the fact that disability can happen to anyone at any moment, and here there's no country also. It could happen at any country, any rural area, any urban area, wherever, And when you talk about the fact that, okay, fine, disabilities happen to you, but that means that every minute, 3 minutes, there's an accident in Delhi, you can, surely know how many people have spinal injuries after that, in that particular sense. So the disaggregated data is not there, but that in itself will tell you that how the enormity of what happens when we think that disability can happen to anyone. And Dr. Sen talked about the aged and talked about children. And I talk about all these communities when I say that, supposingly when you talk about, the, people who are going through a cataract operation or need a hearing aid or, have dementia or Alzheimer or whatever. So they are kind of imagining that, well, in age this has happened. But they're not really thinking that disability could have happened much earlier in that particular sense. And I'm also very, very concerned many times about, the fact that when a state or when the, especially the judiciary, when it passes a law where it says that the passive euthanasia bill is to be passed, then I have worries, that what to think. How to kind of, imagine. Because in 2020, the MTP bill came, the termination of pregnancy. And in that, the selection part, that you could only disable, it's very easy to get, the disabled fetus being killed. Because then there is no question also, that what is going to happen to in on that score. So I think when I started, interacting with the community, and as one I do Dr. Sen also said, and Bhargavi also, everyone. I mean, so you interact with different kind of NGOs, and you are with them, and you talk about people with disabilities, that you understand that somewhere, despite where we kind of say that where is the playing field for us, I mean, I've often said that, look, how is that we only understand about disability as a kind of concessional category. When Hani talks about suffering, I kind of try to understand and tell people, I mean, what suffering means for a person with disability. When you reach a place where there is no toilet that you can go to, and it's such a basic thing. No? They've never thought about it, that you've just got to go to the toilet, and here you are, for not having water the whole day, because you know that there won't be a toilet out there, so you better not go to the toilet at all. Because Aparna mentioned the COVID, I mean, in fact, I'll share with you later. I just did a piece in EPW on COVID and disability. And I remember that how when I came back on 13th, I had a medical checkup, and I came back and I realized that on 14th, my usual caretaker, who's only a part-timer, I mean, I'm quite independent otherwise, did not come. And I realized that, oh my God, now what am I supposed to do? Because at least cooking and all, I'm not being able to kind of, this thing. By that time, I started getting, Facebook messages and also the calls, that what will happen. And there are people who have high support needs, and the caretakers are there, but the caretakers don't have the bill, passes or whatever, where they could reach them. And by 22nd, I think it was very clear that till you give them the pass, you can't. And then, of course, I think the first thing which I did was to dial the disability commissioner's number, and I wrote and I said that, what is to be done? You want us to die or you want us to live? What do you want to do? Because without the caregivers, we will not be able to do much. It's very interesting when Bhargavi says that there is a cycle of care, which is there. This care is very, very important, but because for a disabled person, without care, in one particular sense, you can't survive, in that sense. But I have a different understanding. I mean, I feel that it is always imagining that care is being given by the caregiver, but the care recipient has never been asked as to what care you want, first of all, I mean, and that's a very, very tough question, because it's always like, within the women's movement, we talk about the unpaid work, we talk about like so many, care is not something which is not being talked about. Care is talked about in many, many, channels. And I remember one of the gynecologists, I mean, this is more personal, but I always believe that personal always is political, so that gynecologist, one of my friends had gone there, who also had a, in fact, lesser degree of polio than mine. I mean, I have about so this is very important. We also need to certify ourselves, because if we're not certified. So when I wanted the care pass, they said that send your disability certificate. So it just, I mean, they won't believe that, well, you're just using it by for someone or whatever. So you have to really have this thing. And in Delhi, it became so difficult that the groceries were very difficult to get. I mean, like, in the sense that they said that either give give 2,000 rupees, in the sense, I mean, buy within 2,000, and then we will send you the things home. But otherwise they wouldn't. So there was a group, with Mary Barua and all of them actually created a group in which they would, like, some of them would go and give the groceries to the others, in that sense. But I think much more serious was that they never thought about, at the time of the pandemic, they'd imagine as if disability would be a global categorization. I mean, उनको कैसे कोविड हो सकता है ना, वो तो उनको पहले से ही डिसेबिलिटी हुआ. They never thought about it, and that because they never thought about the hospitals, they've never thought about the toilets in the hospitals, they've never thought about all those things. And I asked these questions, and then one of the doctors saying that, look, at least this ventilator should not go for the disabled person. It should go for the normal person who look for a, like, live for a longer time. And disabled person, to usko to jana hi hai, So I said, how are you going to kind of, think about that? And that is where I kind of, almost I was petrified, that what was the construction of the able-bodied, where it is trying to say that you should not be asking for the ventilator because, first of all, you might not get COVID. And even if you get COVID, we're not going to give it to you. So that, I think, was a serious issue that we thought about. And I also could give you, I mean, an innumerable number of examples, but there could be, disabled women who actually, there was so much of domestic violence at the time of COVID, because, the families who were there, who were actually keeping a disabled woman in the house, but they said that now we don't have money. So they said that you can now go back to your husband who was beating up. I mean, and who knew that, was an abuser. But they would say that, well, you could go back straight to that. So I think when you think about this, the normal, I mean, I'm not sure what normal we are talking about, because the hegemony of the normality, I think, has always been a problem for people with disabilities. And I feel, I would just like to kind of say this, which is very important for me. I mean, why I went to AUD was because that is where I could, because all along I've had this thought that, is it possible that disability can be understood better if we were to create some sort of an academic discipline, which is known as disability studies, and is it possible if we can do that so that people would actually do that and would learn more, and I think that is something which I started doing in AUD. And of course, there are 3-4 courses, and one of the course that I do at the undergrad level, which unfortunately this time because of my deanship I couldn't take it up, is where I actually make people understand disability through Bollywood. Because if you look at Bollywood, it's amazing that there is so much visibility of disability in cinema, but not actually in reality. And when it comes to the question of, like I said, care, I think what we understand, that why is it that we can't think about the possibility of interdependence, where each of us can help each other? Why is it that the only disabled person is almost like a beggar who's asking for what is coming to you? I mean, a disabled person, if you have given them that playing field. And one particular thought that really stayed with me, because again, I'm in the higher education, many of the students who actually had JAWS, the software, where they could kind of, otherwise learn. But because these were all the, online classes, and not all online classes had the capacity where they would be able to, do their lectures, I mean, listen to their lectures on the basis of that. I mean, there was a problem because they were not thinking about the disabled people at that time, about their education at that time at all. Dr. Sen has spoken about how the school and the structure and all. And for deaf people, that was amazing. Most of the dignitaries of different countries you would watch on the television, and you would see that there was a sign language interpreter, who is trying to tell whatever is coming. But when you look at your prime minister or president or whosoever, sign language interpreter is not there. Because somewhere, as citizens of this country, it seems that we are like not counted in a particular, and even if you go from the history of Galton and history of, Hitler, it's almost as if it is better to be dead than alive for a disabled person. And I think that is something which has always been a bothering point. And I think what one really requires and needs to do is that even also the experts, I mean, like who are there, I mean, is that the possibility, I know Bhargavi does work with disabled, is the possibility that whether it is ever possible that even at the school curriculum, as well as at the college curriculum, whether disability can be taught so that we can understand that the stigma that is attached to this disability and lack and the flaws that are attached to the disability, that could be kind of, given up. And I feel that as a disability, I mean, as a person who's, I've also had love affairs with the doctors, various different doctors. And that's my personal, this thing, because I went through cancer, I went through 2 open heart surgeries. But I realized that, in these kind of illnesses, I used to criticize a lot about the medical model of disability. And now I feel that you can't even give up on medicalization, because medicalization in itself also will make you survive, in that particular sense. So it's never a kind of these are all complex questions, and also from humanism to post-humanism, when you think about technology, when you think about guide dogs, when you think about, the fact that, you can think about death, but think about death in which way? I think those are the kind of things which I feel are very, very important for us. But for all that, I feel that some kind of, the epistemology of disability is very critical. And I think all the curriculums, even at the medical level, Satinder has done some work now where, he's got some, this thing at the, for the physiotherapy. And I feel that even the doctors themselves really don't talk about. I wonder, when you talk about issues such as mental health, they've never even thought about it. They've never connected mental health with disability. And they've never thought that what kind of pressure, Bhargavi showed you that whole circle, which has got poverty, which has got whole lot of things that are there, special schools and all that. When you feel that these are the restrictions that are there, whether these restrictions, that you have to go through, and the suffering, which I say is there, whether it will ever be possible to kind of, have some sort of a understanding that they can be thought of more as a human predicament rather than, a predicament only of a person with disability. I think predicament is there for everyone, and anyone can, go through. So I feel that the uh, uh, to think about how, when one has so many restrictions, can you think how it impacts their mental health, how it impacts that, how I have to think about my agency, which can actually cope up, and the resistance that can come, through which I can go up. I will finish by saying, because it's important for me to say this, while of course a lot of things have been spoken about, but at least for disabled, and specifically I would say about women with disabilities, but also about men with disabilities, I think very often we have thought about the fact that disabled people are also asexual, no, or they are hypersexual if you're talking about intellectual disability, or mentally ill women, who are on that score. So I feel that sexuality somewhere, which is in a very Maslowian way, is a very basic need. And yet we never think that this is something which is so very basic, but which is not basic for the disabled people, because they are disabled, and they cannot, I mean, the construction is that they will not be able to go beyond that. And I think that is something which is very, very important for me, that where you think about not only the fact that you're an abject body, I mean, you can't think about anything else, you're just an abject cast off, in that sense, and as if the life is no longer there. But I think that is where we need to bring them back. And I sometimes, I always say that, what if somebody had thought about Stephen Hawking as, in the MTP bill, I mean, as a fetus, the fetus could have been killed. Now, what would have happened to Stephen Hawking? And the theory would not have come. So many, I'm giving only one name, but I think there are so many. You could think about Bach, you could think about Roosevelt, you can think about so many people, who have been disabled and yet have done wonders. I mean, like, whatever, into to their disciplines as well as elsewhere. So I feel, I mean, it was very interesting when Dr. Sen was talking about the sloganeering, and I'm going to stop with that slogan, where I always say that really, I mean, we are not really broken. Don't fix us all the time, okay? And nothing for us without us, I think, is something that should always stay as the motto, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ghai, for that impassioned talk, shall I say. And I think it gave us all a lot to think about, a lot of things that perhaps we take for granted. And, I think you made the point that coping in challenging times for us might be a temporary sort of thing, but perhaps for many others, even everyday life is challenging. I will now like to invite Mr. Mehrotra to speak and to share his thoughts about this entire conversation that has taken place. Mr. Mehrotra.
Well, I have to say that I have been mesmerized by all the wonderful speakers, and 2 hours have just flown by, and it's always a very difficult to start saying anything just before lunchtime. So I will be extremely brief and sort of a flag, a perspective in terms of our own work at the foundation on dealing with mental health issues. And I think, and some of this has been flagged, so I will just briefly share this, and I hope that we will continue to engage with the panel and the others who have logged in this ongoing conversation and this ongoing effort and initiative to understand and see how we can make a difference. And one of the things, most powerful things that resonated for me was when Anita Ji mentioned that the caregivers don't ask us what we need, and there tends to be a supply push rather than a demand pull for the needs of people, whether with disabilities or mental disabilities or mental health issues. And of course, people who have mental health issues are often not in a position to articulate what they need. And the way that the foundation and our striving and has looked at it, and I want to interrupt that chain of thought to say that whenever I have asked His Holiness as to what we should do or what we might explore, his response has always been very simply, what is useful? So what we're looking at here is a conversation on not what we think and to sort of put that out into the world and say, this is the way it is, but to listen. And as Anita Ji and several speakers have said, is to look at what the demand pull is, terrible word from economics, but so that we can see how we can together learn from each other and respond to a need and in whatever way. I think one of the first concerns that has come up for us is to look at mental health and how do you approach it from a public health perspective, because it is the treatment of it is so individualized. And there is a very senior psychiatrist in HOD of a very major government hospital, who's a very dear friend of mine, who retired some years ago. And at the end of it, he called me and he said, "Look, I'm feeling depressed." And I said, "You feel depressed? You've been bailing us all out of it." And he said, "Well, I've spent that many years and in a public hospital, and I get about 3 to 5 minutes with the patient, and there are only so few of us. And so, what can I do? I just end up supplying, prescribing one of about 20 salts, and there isn't even that much discretion on what salts you prescribe." So that really was a sense of how desperate the situation is. And we felt as an institution, and His Holiness felt that this was a very important area to bring to bear a juxtaposition and a mutuality of understanding, and recognizing that this needs a diversity of approaches. And since each one of us, in a sense, has a different mental disposition, and every single person who is feeling challenged by their emotions or their minds is unique. I mean, at one level, of course, every patient is unique, but I think the generalizations that apply to other forms of illnesses are often, I seem to be losing you. I don't know if I'm still there. Yes, okay. It's very unique in the case of the mind. I mean, you could look at COVID as a kind of a particular virus that affects everybody, and then look for generalized solutions. And so in this quest, we felt, or His Holiness felt, and under his direction, we felt that we should start looking at exploring this, and that's why we're here talking to you and listening to you more than talking, that we should look at what modern science and research and wisdom has to say. And because we must constantly continue to learn and embrace unfolding knowledge, across all areas and discipline, and not just, continue with pushing or promoting or preaching or practicing what may have evolved 2,500 years ago. And so, in the research, it's, universities, and I think particularly led by Dan Goldman and John Kabat-Zinn at Harvard, and then Richie Davidson at Wisconsin, established that, people who tend to suffer or experience the suffering, to use with this phrase, are often obsessed with themselves in the sense of the I, me, mine. And so, like you said so eloquently, and many of you said, that part of what you go through is what you go through. I mean, you were born with condition X. That is a reality, and you stop grasping at the idea that somehow this is going to change. Your disability is going to go away, or at least the physicality of the disability is going to go away. What can change is your relationship to it. And so they found that in psychological testing, that people who were going through mental challenges, and they were not always triggered by traditional external circumstances, like COVID is a predictable framework within which a lot of people experience a set of emotions. But what person A can deal with, a person B may not be able to deal with. And so there is the particularity. And so they found the techniques and practices that would soften the sense of self, the I, me, mine, diminished their experience and their struggles with their situations. And not all the external situations could be changed. Not every relationship can be shed because it is oppressive. So, and then that dovetailed, and this is where the important work at Stanford, where there is a Dalai Lama Center for the Study of Compassion, and at Wisconsin University, where there is a similar initiative. They found that meditating, and maybe we will do a session on meditation, and meditation is not merely an anesthetic for the mind. It is actually trying to internalize and change our reflexive responses to external stimuli. Was that the whole idea of neuroplasticity, that by changing or feeding ourselves a different mental diet, which is a description of meditation in some ways, we could change the neurobiology, the neurochemistry of the brain. And this can be measured in MRIs, and as to which parts of the brain locate these emotions, and so changes would occur. So, yours have been very powerful and very moving narratives of who you are. They tell us so much about that, and of your sensitivity and your passion and your commitment, not merely to addressing your own predicaments. And I think one of the speakers very, eloquently, and that moved me, said, we have to, approach this with great humility and the recognition that we are often not very different from our patients, that we don't approach this from a position of all-knowing superiority, that I can tell you what to do, but that we can together arrive at ways that may find solutions. So we had hoped and planned a discussion and a conversation and questions, but I think we've crossed a Rubicon of 2 hours and sort of 10 minutes of very engaging conversation, and with lunch to follow. So I'm going to take the liberty of expressing, concluding the session with a very warm and sincere thank you to each of our panelists, Dr. Sen, Dr. Oberoi, Dr. Davar, and Dr. Ghai, and of course to Aparna Sanyal, who is, as I put it, a very close colleague and associate of mine. And we hope to do a lot of work together in this area, and we will seek your continuing support. I had put out a little chat on the chat box that if those of you, we know our panelists very well, who have been participants in this, either on Facebook or as a part of this Zoom panel, please send us your email addresses so we can stay connected with you. info@furhhdl.org. We see this as an ongoing conversation, a collaboration. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Aparna. She's sort of like a younger daughter, a kindred soul. I am so blessed to be working with her in this very important enterprise. And thank you. And somewhere I saw one of our icons, Kamla Basin. I don't know if she's still, I think she's logged out. And Kamla ji has been a great inspiration to so many of us at so many levels. So Kamla ji, if you're still on, thank you very much. God bless. There she is. So thank you, everybody. And we will stay in touch. And in the coming weeks and months, we will be reaching out to you for your help and continuing support. Stay well, stay safe.
You too.
And stay blessed.
You too.
Namaskar and thank you.